YouTube, how's it going? The Goat House is back. I have some trade scenarios for you guys today involving legit trade candidates from the training camp season here of the NFL. Preseason right around the corner. A lot of these names will be brought up. Maybe some trades will go down. So I took these trade candidates and I thought, and I created what I thought was the best trade scenario for each of these guys. So you can play along in the comments. We're always interacting with you guys on Twitter. A lot going on. Some unfortunate news, some injuries happening. It's just that time of the year. It's just unfortunate. But follow us on Twitter and here on the channel. Like, subscribe, turn notifications on. We got a bunch of predictions, rankings, and more. Cannot wait for our in-season content, weekly picks. I'm pumped about it. So join us for all that. Here's our Twitter, just constant updates and on everything going on right now. Talking kind of trade rumors, thoughts, and more on there as well. So check it out. So first trade scenario, Jessie Bates, who I don't actually think will be traded just because the Bengals are, still in that. They believe they can win the Super Bowl this year, and they want to keep Jessie Bates to help them, obviously, be involved in that. But if he continues to hold out, then it's pretty realistic. So really thought about the Eagles, really thought about the Jets here, two teams I really considered. Went with the Eagles, and I had, it very well could be Jessie Bates for a first-round pick. Now the question is, does a team find a team that has the cap space, wants a free safety, needs a free safety, and would like to dish out that big money to a free safety long term. That's a tricky part when it comes to Jessie Bates because he's worth whatever he's going to get. He's worth a high-end amount of money for a safety. But there are a chunk of teams out there, a load of teams that just simply do not want to pay a free safety that amount of money. As good as they think we know he is. They just don't want to do it. So that's a tricky part. So very well could be a first-round pick for Jessie Bates. Would a team trade a first-round pick? Eagles trying to save up those first-round picks to potentially move up for a quarterback. It's just all on how Hurts, besides the point, but how Hurts will play this year. So I thought of a creative way to make it happen without the first-round pick. So we threw in a second-round pick, and then the Eagles won't have a whole lot of use for free safety Anthony Harris. So they throw him in the deal. So it would be Bates and Jaquiski Tart likely because he is a strong safety, Tart that is. And then throw in Andre Dillard, who's been involved in trade discussions in the past. And that could be a big-time tackle insurance guy at first for the Bengals, but possibly a guy that could outplay Jonah Williams and take his spot there. And, of course, you have the injury concern with La'el Collins. So having another legit tackle could be pretty big for the Bengals there. So that is kind of equivalent to maybe what that first-round pick would be for Jessie Bates, and the Eagles kind of load that defense up even more. Reality is they're trading what would be Anthony Harris would be a backup if they had Bates. Dillard is a backup because they have a very good offensive line, very good tackles, and a second-round pick. So I think it's pretty good for both sides there. The Bengals brought in some DBs to potentially replace Jessie Bates, Daxton Hill, depending on where they want to play him, kind of a guy that can do it all. I honestly liked him more at the upside at corner more than free safety. He didn't line up an actual free safety a whole lot at Michigan, so we'll see what they'll do with him. But if he eventually starts somewhere. But again, I thought about the Jets as well. Little tricky though. Jets wouldn't give up a first-round pick. Can they match something like this? Maybe it would be a second and a third. Do they want to do that because they're still kind of drafting well and they're not rebuilding. They're kind of very far along, but they're still gathering assets throughout the draft, which could be early to mid picks in each round. So would they want to move on from those pieces? But it's a tricky one, like I said, because do the Bengals want to move on from Bates? If he just refuses to play, I feel like he's got to come around, and play because he's got to want to win a Super Bowl. He understands what the Bengals have is going is special, and when the Bengals want to not have their star piece, free safety piece here while they're trying to win a Super Bowl, and then it comes down to you got to narrow it down. Do teams, can they afford him? Do they want a safety? Can they pay him long term? Do they want to? So some questions there, even though he's very talented. Next, Deontay Johnson, which wanted a new deal. It's kind of come out the Steelers aren't going to pay him what he wanted. They're not going to pay him $20 million. The discussions apparently started again recently. They could reach a deal if Johnson is willing to come down on that. So it's very possible that the Steelers and they keep Johnson around. It's also possible that they do not extend him, but they keep him because they want to use him. They want to win right now, and then maybe lose him in free agency, get a third-round compensatory pick, maybe trade him at the deadline if the season isn't going great. That's a possibility as well. Or, because the rise of George Pickens, even though he hasn't taken a snap in the NFL yet, he's just looks like a legit receiver in training camp so far. And they have, of course, Chase Claypool, and they picked up Miles Boykin, and they have Calvin Austin, guys like that. So they don't have Deontay Johnson out there, but, a team that could afford to maybe trade him now and get a lot more than you would get hanging on to him. It just really depends on the negotiations and where the lowest or the Steelers would want, or the highest the Steelers would want to go, the lowest Deontay Johnson want to go in that price range there. So I went with the Texans. The Texans have been in the market for a receiver. They've been working out some depth guys, obviously, but I think Chester Rogers, last night it was, but I feel like they've kind of been brought up in receiver discussions, and they're definitely looking for one, another solid one to help Davis Mills grow and just get better at the receiver position, because they have Brandon Cooks out there. And then who's next? Nico Collins, perhaps. John Mechie, I love that draft pick. He was coming off that injury, and now he's going to miss this year, which was unfortunate news there, being diagnosed with leukemia. But, I'm confident with him. He'll come back. He's going to recover. He's going to come back. Strong, tough dude. So, one for the future, really. But there's nothing really guaranteed in place besides Brandon Cooks right now on what they'll get in terms of production and consistent play. So that's a team that definitely could be in the market for a big-time receiver. And the question is, do you trade picks for Deontay Johnson and then pay him what he wants, around $20 million? I would say, I would not do that. Deontay Johnson's a very solid receiver. It seems like there's a lot of those types of receivers coming in the draft every year. So I think even though he's very good, if you're good at your job drafting, he's kind of replaceable. Maybe even a guy that can catch the ball a little more consistently. Even though he's very good, but trading picks and then dishing out that money, it's pretty tough. But I think there's a team that is bound to think like they're bound to be able to do that, want to do that. So the Texans kind of made sense. Definitely don't think the Steelers would get a first-round pick out of them, but they would get kind of close to value-wise. So a 2023 second and then a 2024 third is what I came up with. Thought that made some sense. Maybe if it's 2 picks from this year, maybe it's a second and a fourth. We know the Steelers probably can do some damage with those draft picks as well. Colbert is out, but I think that staff is good, just really good at their jobs, identifying receivers at least. So I thought that one made sense. We'll see what happens with Johnson and the Steelers there. Next, so I kind of been thinking Nelson Agholor could be a trade candidate because the Patriots have they don't have what is known as the best receiver room, but it's pretty deep. They got some ball players in there, and they added Devontae Parker. They added Tyquan Thornton, who they obviously like a lot from the draft. And Agholor was a little disappointing last year, and he's got one more year in his deal. They could move on from him. They need some cap space as well, some wiggle room there. So thought that all made sense that they actually could deal him. And then the Cowboys made sense now because James Washington, their free agent addition, I thought that was a sneaky pickup too, pairing him with Dak Prescott. And James Washington's kind of a sideline, deep threat, home run type of guy. So Nelson Agholor fits that very well. That's a very good replacement, and I think he'd be productive, kind of like where he was on the Raiders, in the Cowboys offense with Dak Prescott. So the Cowboys are a team I can see. I thought of the Packers as well. Really like the Packers. I really like the Cowboys. Looking for that James Washington replacement. They could go with a Will Fuller, Emmanuel Sanders, etc. in free agency. I thought that made sense as well. I think those two guys specifically, maybe T.Y. Hilton too, but I think, between Sanders and Fuller, I think I like Sanders for them. I think they could be interested in him. But Agholor is such a great replacement for James Washington, what they wanted out of him, because Lamb plays a bit of outside, inside, like him a lot in the inside. Schultz, coming from the tight end position. And then you got Tolbert, they just don't have that. And who's kind of a big body guy, does a little bit of everything. And then Gallup, who's an outside receiver, but they liked having Cooper and Gallup on the outside. Gallup coming off that injury, he's going to miss some time. They want that pure speedster outside receiver to pair with those guys. And Agholor just made a lot of sense. So Patriots maybe looking to clear money. They probably wouldn't get much for Agholor right now. He wasn't super productive last year, so I thought of a 2023 fifth-round pick, which is something. The tough part about this is the Cowboys, got that for trading Amari Cooper. That might not sit well with some fans. It's like you almost valued close, not exactly, but Cooper and Agholor are the same. I think people would and that would look bad, but I think people would be thinking the wrong way. They saved a lot of money with Cooper. and then going from Cooper to Agholor, again, you're saving money there. So that would be the tough part, though. But it makes sense. It's like kind of like that perfect, if you're looking for a James Washington would actually maybe better here style player, Nelson Agholor makes sense, though. So I think that's definitely a trade candidate. Could the Patriots cut him? I think they get something out of him for sure. They got a 7th out of N'Keal Harry. Then they get a 5th out of Agholor. So I brought up the Packers. The Broncos just had Tim Patrick go down, but I think they have this type of receiver and, a guy like KJ Hamler, maybe Jerry Jeudy as well, who's higher than Hamler on the depth chart, but somewhat similar there. So there's some other teams there if guys go down, but I really like the Cowboys. I thought the Cowboys made sense there. Next up, Chuck Clark, which I keep bringing up because it's interesting because now the Ravens are shifting their defense a little bit. Before it was a lot of man coverage, a lot of cover zero. You want those physical safeties that can play in the box, could even blitz, can man up on guys, and Chuck Clark was very good at that. Very good, very versatile in that kind of type of defense, and they actually shifted things, and I think you see some coverage safeties in there at Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton, and they're going to run a little bit more zone coverage, and I keep explaining it. The main reason why is because their biggest competition is teams like the Chiefs, the Bills, the Bengals, who beat them up big time last year, and you throw in teams like the Chargers who kind of play similar long ball there, and but mainly those first few teams I mentioned, they torch man coverage. Especially the blitz as well, which usually is kind of part of man coverage. That's why the Bengals beat them up so bad last year. They said so many weapons that man coverage was just too easy to go against. So they're shifting things for the right reasons. And Clark can still fit that. I think he's a good football player. He's versatile enough, and I think they can use 3 safeties at the same time, and they very well might keep him because of that reason. I think they can use Mark Williams at free safety, Kyle Hamilton either at strong or kind of in the slot because he's done that, or they can use Chuck Clark at strong or kind of in the box area. Could he play like a linebacker type role because we've seen that, that type of play from him, safety in the box, so it's very, very, very realistic they keep him. So I don't keep bringing him up because I think he's definitely gone. I keep bringing it up because it's an interesting situation because they're shifting things, and it's possible. And who's running that defense that the Ravens been running with Chuck Clark? They're Giants because they got their defense coordinator, Don Martindale. They also could use a safety to pair with Xavier McKinney. So right now it's between what looks like Julian Love, Belton, who they drafted from Iowa, and then they pick up the Bucs backup safety as well, Adams. So battle, I guess, for that spot. I think Chuck Clark an instant fit and upgrade there to pair. It's a pretty good safety duo there. So with McKinney, so then that made sense. But also, it made a lot of sense is the Ravens definitely need a receiver. Darius Slayton has been brought up quite a bit in the past, not even right now too, but in the past as well. So that would kind of make sense. I think Clark has a little bit more value. Another year on his contract as well. So, I threw a 7th rounder. I thought that made sense. Could it be a 6th rounder? Possibly, with Slayton kind of, I think, would step in there and be the second best receiver, right, very easily. I mean, he can even compete for the best spot there because we saw what he did, even though I have high hopes for Bateman. But we saw what Slayton, we see what he's capable of, with Daniel Jones even in the past. So I think it'd be very productive for them. So maybe an even trade would make sense as well. But value Clark. I think Martindale and the Giants would value Clark. So this one is like, okay, maybe it's not a high percentage chance to happen because do the Ravens want to trade Clark? Would they do this player for player? But it made a lot of sense to me. It made a ton of sense. So we'll see. Next, Roquan Smith has been brought up a little bit. He has, it's kind of calmed down a little bit. Like, all right, maybe he's willing to play. He's at training camp, but it wasn't really participating right away in the actual camp itself. But it sounded like he wants a new contract, new extension. It sounds like the Bears and Roquan Smith haven't really been close yet, and I really know why. It's a tricky situation, but the Bears shifting their defensive scheme to a 4-3. Roquan Smith fits so well in that 3-4 inside linebacker role. So do you dish out an insane amount of money, which Roquan Smith's talents say he's worth for sure? Do you dish that out and they don't really view him as a fit then? I keep saying I think Roquan Smith is good enough and young enough and improving enough to figure it out and be fine. But it's a little tricky. We've seen guys like Zach Cunningham, Dion Jones, Miles Jack, as soon as a scheme change, they just really go downhill. We've seen even a guy like Cunningham go back to the correct scheme when going to the Titans, and he's very good again. So something with the linebackers and scheme change. So I think the Bears staff is confident with Roquan Smith. I think we all are confident because he's that talented, but you got to understand the risk. So it's a little tricky giving him exactly what he wants, that big payday. So could they possibly decide not to pay him, and then maybe they have to trade him because they can get quite a bit for him? The Steelers made the most sense. Steelers you struggle at the inside linebacker position last year. They run that 3-4. They struggle to stop the run. I think Roquan Smith fits in perfectly in Mike Tomlin's defense. They'd be willing to dish out a first-round pick for sure. Devin Bush hasn't really worked out for them. I thought he fit more as a 4-3 guy coming out of Michigan. Steelers run that 3-4, so maybe that's why he's struggling a little bit. Then the Bears are shifting to that 4-3, so I thought Devin Bush being involved made some sense. And the first round still goes to the Bears. That did seem like a lot there, so I threw a fourth round back in return to the Steelers. So I thought this made sense for both sides. The Bears very well could pay Roquan and keep him because he's talented and worth the money. Maybe just take not a huge gamble, but a little bit of a gamble on him fitting that new scheme, and or maybe he plays on what he's got going this year, because he is on that first round pick option, a very early first round pick option, which is is an underpay for Roquan Smith, but it's not nothing. It's still a decent amount of money, so maybe he'll play on that. But other Steelers, thinking about teams that made the most sense, other Steelers by far made the most sense for a guy like Roquan Smith. I thought about the Chargers as well because their linebacker play hasn't been great, and then Staley coached with the Bears in the past as well, but I don't know if they're valuing the linebacker position maybe like a Steelers team perhaps. So I thought this made a lot of sense. Do I think Roquan Smith actually gets traded? Probably not, but it is a tricky situation. Like, do we pay him? And if it comes down to he's sitting or getting paid, then maybe they have to trade him. So it's one of those ones where it's kind of hard to see, but it's kind of realistic at the same time. And then speaking of the Bears, this kind of what sparked this video. It was kind of a buildup of guys being brought up and trade rumors, even though maybe it's not all of them are serious trade candidates. They're somewhat legit. So this one happened yesterday. Of Tevin Jenkins, and speaking of the Bears, we're just talking about the Bears, who could be in that somewhat of a fire sale here because they're in that rebuild stage. He kind of got brought up yesterday, and that kind of sparked the video. Like, all right, we got a lot of guys to talk about now, somewhat of a lot of guys. So, it's about Tevin Jenkins, who it sounds like the Bears have already held discussions with several teams. And it makes sense. Second-year guy that some teams viewed as a tackle, some teams will view as a guard because he's a good run blocker in the right scheme. So I think this is a tough one. This is a tough one to predict in general. Which team? I know which teams will be interested. It's a list of teams, but which team does it's hard to predict because there's so many teams. It's hard to predict actually what team he'll land on. But what's his value too? I mean, just drafted in the early second round pick a year ago. And the Bears don't seem to have much interest in Jenkins. Jenkins doesn't seem to have much interest in the Bears. Leverage kind of drops. Bears looking to shop them. So it's very tough to figure out the exact value on this one. But I thought of teams like we just had the Bears and the Steelers making a deal. I thought the Steelers actually made some sense. They seem to be insisting on their crew though. So that thing that's weird, but that may be the case. Pre-draft, I really thought the Ravens were a really good fit. Jenkins kind of fits that power scheme. Blocking scheme style, and I thought the Ravens were a good fit. They've added some guys at right tackle. Would they like him for guard or backup tackle? So maybe they're I don't want to say crowded, maybe a little crowded. The Chiefs could be interested to play him at right tackle. The Titans could be interested. I think they, right tackle or guard. There's just quite a few teams that made sense to me. Would the Chargers want him for right tackle? I mean, the Cowboys are running that type of scheme. They bring in Tyler Smith, who's kind of a similar style. Would they move Jenkins to guard if they got him, or to tackle? Obviously, that's a very it's a battle with steel because they're moving Tyler Smith to guard, actually, who has some upside there. But I thought the Falcons made sense because that Arthur Smith scheme, a lot of bully football, a lot of running the football. Mariota and Cordell Patterson, they brought in Algier, who can handle a load, and he's very physical, especially on the inside runs. So Jenkins made sense in that aspect as a fit. It also made sense as a need because they could use him at right tackle or guard. Maybe even guard makes a little more sense with the Falcons, but 50-50 there. And then what made another step further, what made some sense is that who drafted Tevin Jenkins? The Bears did. Who was their GM? Ryan Pace. Ryan Pace is now with the Falcons, and he hasn't been afraid to bring in ex-Bears players. And obviously Ryan Pace, who traded away 3 picks to move up to get Jenkins, is very high on Jenkins, and it looks like he has some say in there. And what I thought was very interesting, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but very interesting, was, like I said, the Bears traded up for Tevin Jenkins. Who did they trade ahead of by one spot? Who did they have to jump to make sure they got Jenkins? The Atlanta Falcons. So who took Richie Grant then? So that I thought that was very interesting as well. For all the reasons I explained, I decided the Falcons, out of a list of teams that would make sense, was the best. And the pick is very tough. 4th round, I feel like, is the maximum, but I did do a 4th because anything less, I would not be surprised if the 5th or some sort of swap of picks. At the same time, I mean, just a year ago, you took a guy that some people thought was a first-round prospect. He went early second. You traded away 3 picks. I know it's a different staff. 3 picks to get him. One of those teams they jumped, probably going to take him. Like, how could it be it might be a 5th, but how could it be that value or equal value? So I thought a 4th, and he's still got the upside. A lot of people were asking me on Twitter. I was trying to explain, why are they shopping him? And some people think it's injuries, and I think that can play a part, but I don't think it's the main injury. The Bears drafted him with a back injury. He actually came back down the stretch. I think the Seahawks game, he had a shoulder injury. He ended up practicing a couple days later. So the back injury was a concern, but he was actually able to get in the game and start some games during the season. So I don't think it's that major of a concern. We're like, all right, this guy's not going to work because he's got an injury or two. I don't think it's that. He could have played better last year. I mean, the penalties were kind of a mess, so he definitely has to clean that up. So maybe they didn't like what they saw there. But I think the main thing is the scheme change of the Chicago Bears. They're going to run a little bit more outside zone. Jenkins really just only fits a power scheme. Some people call it man, gap scheme, all the same thing there. It's just basically just bully of blockers, north and south. There's no pulling. There's no getting downfield, getting on the outside. That's just what he fits, whether it's tackle or guard. So the Bears didn't view him as a fit. He wasn't running with the starters, even that early stage of the OTAs. So that probably pissed him off, and he probably wanted to go to a better fit, and they're like, hey, we don't really view him as a fit, so let's try to get something up. So that is really why, the main reason why this is coming up. So curious to see where he goes, because, again, I mentioned a list of teams there. The Giants, too, if they want to play him at guard, if they like him at tackle better, then no. I had Slayton involved in this video. Could it be a Slayton and Jenkins? And probably a long shot, but it made kind of some sense though there. So it's an interesting one. And then Dion Jones. We had some Dion Jones news this morning at the Falcons, and we've kind of I do these trade scenarios and candidate videos all the time, and sometimes I plug guys in there that aren't really rumored to be traded. I just kind of feel they could, and I included Dion Jones in there before, actually the Commanders, actually involving Deron Payne, and now it actually came out today that the Falcons actually have been trying to trade Dion Jones, but they just have not been successful doing that. They don't want to cut him because he's too good of a player, of course, but now that we know that they've been trying to trade him and they're announcing to the world that we're not going to cut him, maybe talks will continue. It'll spark some things. So I think he's still a trade candidate. And I keep going back to the Commanders. The linebacker play has not been good. He fits. He was a Pro Bowl level player in a 4-3 defense. And the Falcons switched to a 3-4, and he kind of went downhill a little bit. He's been getting paid a lot of money to afford him this year. You're going to need about like $10 million, just $10.11 million. They believe that's the exact number. So fits the Commanders. They could use some more linebacker help. They got Dion Jones. I think he'd be a stud there. I think that defense would be ridiculous as well because that's kind of the last piece of a very good defense, and it made some sense. And Deron Payne going to the Falcons makes a lot of sense as well. And like I said, maybe a month or two ago, I had this scenario involving Dion Jones and Deron Payne, but I had picks involved as well that kind of favored Dion Jones having more value, and I think he does in terms of talent and position. But I think the value and leverage kind of drops a little bit because the Falcons have been going out trying to shop him because the Falcons are in rebuild. They don't view him as a fit. They're trying to get rid of that money because they're going to go crazy in the future. So leverage drops a little bit. And Deron Payne's been brought up a little bit as well. So that's why it makes so much sense. Why not go player for player? Commanders would be better with Dion Jones. The Falcons would be better with Deron Payne. And then to even bring it up because why? Because I keep saying it, Grady Jarrett needs some damn help. He hasn't really had good help on the inside of him last year at the nose tackle position. But even further into that, remember the Falcons signed Eddie Goldman maybe a month ago, maybe a little less than that. And it's like, all right, Goldman needs to stay on the field, but he's a pretty solid nose tackle. The Falcons finally got a solid nose tackle. He turns around and retires, so they still need that nose tackle that we know they need, we know that they want. Deron Payne's sitting there, and he might be available. It's kind of been quite obvious, actually. So it just made so much sense, So I don't know. Maybe the Falcons have been asking way too much for Dion Jones. That's why it's been unsuccessful. I'm surprised either team hasn't really thought of this, honestly. It just makes a lot of – and a pick could be involved on either side, whatever it may be, something small, maybe a little bigger than small. But it just makes so much sense to me. I don't know. So we'll see if something like that goes down. We'll see if more news comes out about Dion Jones. We'll see if the Falcons are bluffing right now about not cutting him. I think they could be saying that mainly to try to spark more trade, but that doesn't mean they're gonna cut him eventually. But it's possible. If they did, I would not really agree with that. But because they would not save much money at all there. I've heard that maybe they don't like his attitude in the locker room. Maybe he's not happy with the scheme change and the way he's been playing, so maybe he wants a trade. So it is what it is. And then Jimmy Garoppolo, which I think actually will eventually be cut. I think the Browns could have interest if cut. Well, let me correct that. I was thinking the Browns could have interest if he was cut, and if Deshaun Watson was suspended for what we thought he was going to be suspended for, but 6 games. So it depends on if the NFL appeals and changes things. Then Jimmy Garoppolo or the Browns potentially could be interested in Jimmy Garoppolo, but it's not looking like that right now because it's only a 6-game suspension for Deshaun Watson. So kind of just leaves the Seahawks, and that's it. Some people will bring up the Texans from time to time. They like Davis Mills though. It just kind of leaves the Seahawks, so I think the 49ers could eventually cut him because maybe no teams offer because they know they're going to cut him. The Seahawks maybe know they're going to get him, but maybe they want to get something out of nothing here, and they want to get a decent pick, and this is probably the highest they probably can get, and that would be going along with paying a portion of his salary, and maybe they wouldn't even want to pay a portion of salary because they can clear the full $25.55 million. Just by cutting him. But if they get a 4th-round pick, that's appealing enough. So it's kind of a debate for the Falcons within their organization. Do we rather just clear all this money? Do we trade him and try to get something? But if they pay, because he's going to cost around that 25.55 for that new team, there's really not too many teams that can afford that right now. The Seahawks would need some help. So the 49ers would pay that $12.5 million to help to assist them a little bit, and they would have to give up the 4th-round pick. So would the Seahawks want to do that? Would they just want to wait till he's cut, sign him to a cheaper deal? Probably. So that's a tricky one. I think he's eventually cut. Do the Niners try to, help a team out, pay a lot of money just to move him for the right price? Yes. Otherwise, they would rather just clear the full 25.55. That the contract was, it's not one of those quarterback contracts where you have to trade him to clear more money. They actually can clear the full damn thing, cutting him there. So it's an interesting situation there. Eventually, I do think he'll be cut. And he probably signs with the Seahawks unless Deshaun Watson's suspension ends up being a lot bigger than maybe the Browns. But it's probably the Seahawks there. So, yeah, we'll see what eventually happens with this. 49ers made it clear they're going with Trey Lance. It would have been ideal if they could have tried to trade Garoppolo a long time ago. Injury was kind of preventing that. But it's supposed to happen, around mid-August is what everyone was saying, whether it's a trade or cut. So, that's not too far. We're in August now. It's right around the corner. So we'll see. I thought I would just throw a Jimmy Garoppolo one in here that if a trade happened, one that kind of made sense. And the 4th round might be even a little rich at the same time. That's a tough part because if it's a 5th, 49ers may go, we just want to clear all that money instead. Is it worth it to pay some of it just to get a 5th? Maybe. And then as the Seahawks, that's the tricky part with the Seahawks too because, hey, the 49ers paid a chunk of it, so he's going to be a lot cheaper. And we get a better quarterback. We give up a 4th-round pick for, we're probably not going to win anything this year, though, at the same time. And then we have to extend him. And it's a little tricky. That's why on both sides it kind of makes more sense that for him to be cut and sign with a team like the Seahawks there. So, it's a little tricky. So there'll be a big day when he's cut and see how early he signs and how big of a contract if he is starting fresh there as a free agent. So it's curious to see. Going to be interesting for sure. I think it's going to be very interesting, like it is every year when teams start to cut guys, and then we have that kind of mini free agency the day after, teams claiming these guys who got better, who got this guy, and then who are they going to cut after they added this guy. That's always fun to me. So we'll have you covered for all that. It's really right around the corner. Preseason football right around the corner. We have you covered for all that as well. Follow us on Twitter. And I did want to mention too that I asked our super followers to kind of participate in this. We had a suggestion of using guys like Zeke and then Panthers receivers. Could they be dealt? I think that's a good idea for a trade deadline during the year. Somebody needs Zeke, or Cowboys are want to move on from him, and then maybe like a Robbie Anderson from the Panthers. I think it's a possibility. Maybe at the trade deadline, maybe not right now. And of course we'll have you covered. We always do those trade deadline videos as well. So, but that's gonna do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.